Thank you once again to our sponsor Kyndryl, who run and reimagine the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses. With a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability, Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and lasting competitive edge. You can find Kyndryl and the Kyndryl Institute at kyndryl.com/institute. Let's get stuck into today's episode with a little intro. Boards demand proof, CFOs ask the hard questions, and too often innovation leaders are left with activity reports and no impact. Today's book introduces a system that changes the game. It's called expected value, or XV. It's a new language, it's a new logic, and a new way to prove that innovation doesn't just look good, it can deliver value. It's a pleasure to welcome the author of that book, great support of the show, author of Expected Value, The System to Measure, Prove, and Scale Value. Simon Hill, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aidan. Well done getting through that mouthful.
I want to also say on the shelf there behind me, you'll see One Smart Crowd, which is Simon's former book that he wrote with Alpheus Bingham, who was the founder in Innocentive, which is part of the Wazuku clan. Let's get stuck in, Simon. The first thing I want to say is I saw so much of myself in this book. I saw so many people I know who work in innovation in this book. And I also saw the difficulty for innovators to accept this new system. And by that, I mean, it's hard work to actually go and put manners on innovation and to put metrics on innovation. And it's easier sometimes to just blame the dinosaurs that they don't get it, but they have to get it. And it's our job to help them get it.
Thank you for that. And look, one of the big reasons I wanted to come on this show to launch the book, which just launched yesterday, right? So we're in the first 24 hours of pushing this thing out, was because I know that you live and breathe this. You read the books, you care about them, you'll give me real honest feedback. And I've enjoyed our little chats offline as you've been skipping through this as well. And I really value that feedback, right? That was all part of the research and the work that went into trying to get this right, because I think fundamentally that innovation isn't broken, but the way we measure it is. And if we do not measure the value that we are producing as innovation teams and innovators, then we risk slipping into the world of innovation theater. And that may be some of the reasons why the chief innovation officer role is one of the shortest tenured roles in organizations globally, because we simply do not have a good measure that finance can sign off on and that the business really buys into and believes. This is a long, hard labor of love, this book, but I'm super proud of what we've produced and put
Somebody,
out.
I don't know who it was, recently said CIO, Chief Innovation Officer, CIO, career is over. And I was like going, I told my wife, I was like, look, it wasn't me, it's everybody. And but this is part of the problem. The problem is many of us get put in a role because we're creative or we're innovative, or the organization thinks maybe being digitally literate or being interested in AI or reading books on innovation means you'd be a good head of innovation. But for things to really work, they have to have metrics that the organization, and in particular the CFO, can understand, or whoever is funding these ideas. And I wanted to share your forward, because the forward was written in pure frustration, I felt. And it was a frustration not just yours, but so many people you worked with and who trusted you and who were customers of Wazuku couldn't get it over the line. And that's where the essence of this book comes from.
And I say in it, I wrote this book out of frustration. It's line one of the book, right? And I say not frustration with innovation teams, because as I observed quickly, they are some of the most passionate, hardworking people that there are. But the frustration is with the system, or the lack of one, as you've alluded to. I think you said finance teams, all the people funding innovation. I think it has to be finance teams. We have to find a way to help innovation speak the language of finance, most notably the language of the P&L and the balance sheets, right? That might sound like we're suddenly trying to strip away creativity. We're not. That we're trying to strip away all the things that make innovation inherently innovative. We're not. But we have to find a way to translate all of that creativity and all that good activity, which ultimately is cost and investment, right, into something future value creative, into a framework and a system that can talk the language of the people that can draw big fat red lines through that innovation budget 1, 2, 3 years down the road and kill all of the hard work that's been done and help to justify the values coming argument or whatever else might look like that. So it is difficult, right? But we don't have good forward looking metrics, good forward looking ways that the business really buys into. And the mechanisms of ROI and discounted cash flows and net present values just don't work in the fuzzy front end of what's the value of an idea, right? And so that's really what we're trying to tackle.
You know that Mark Twain quote, history doesn't repeat but it rhymes. One of the rhyming verses of every case that we see in innovation is the moment that many innovators and less experienced innovators will blame the CFO as the enemy and kind of go, "Oh, John or Mary totally killed it. They just," and you're. But we flip the lens with this book, and it's one of the things you learn as you go through it. Is it's actually the onus is on us. It's not a fault, but the onus is on us to actually, as you say, speak their language. And I'd love you to share this rhyme that we see all the time. I'll set you up with a little quote. You said that one moment crystallized it. This is the frustration. This is the impetus to write the book. A global financial services company had invested millions, thousands of ideas, dozens of pilots, plenty of buzz. Then headwinds hit, and the CFO asked a simple question: what has this delivered to our bottom line? And the team were full of stories, full of activity metrics, engagements up, all the things that we say, but they had no system for answering the real question. And they blamed the CEO or the CFO when actually that's on us.
Totally. And that does walk us into the story. You said in your introduction you felt like you could really associate with this. And I told you running into this that as part of some of the mentorship work that I do, I gave some of the early chapters to some of the mentees that I work with who just wanted more of the book because they could also really associate with that, right? It's told in parts through a fictional first person narrative of an innovation manager called Freya and a small team around her and she has to walk into that familiar setting that we have, right? Which is it's a fictional story, but built around that example you gave of this financial services business and thousands of others that I've experienced over the years. Where, yeah, we walk into that room, that budget meeting, that annual strat meeting, the innovation portfolio review, full of nice charts and things that are measuring momentum and velocity and activity, but are they really measuring value? And so as Freya's walking through her presentation and feeling like she's really making inroads with this senior leadership team who seem to be nodding and smiling, and then the CFO just casually says, "That's great, Freya, but what's the value of all this?" And as she scrambles for an answer, she realizes how empty all of the metrics really are, back to that point around speaking the language of finance, right? And it's not that they hadn't done great work, right? They'd run incredible projects. They had initiatives that were creating value, but there wasn't an easy mechanism to translate that back to the organization. And I know that there are thousands and thousands of examples, and that's the deep tragedy of this. As I said, it's not a frustration with innovation teams, it's a frustration with a lack of the system to help to articulate that language into something that translates. And just to really emphasize this point, there's still today on a monthly basis over 60,000 searches in Google or AI these days, I guess, for what is innovation, right? Like there are lots and lots and lots of people out there looking for it. We're professionalizing innovation management and professionalizing innovation full stop, but people are still wondering what it is, right? And the book details some of that, right? Again, I play that through in one of the chapters where Freya goes and does this Google search and gets all these contradictory answers back and is trying to find something that's simple that she can align around and bring to life in a way that we don't have to keep Googling it. It can't be so complicated. It can't be so abstract in the things that we're trying to do. And at the end of the day, if we go back to this concept of expected value, innovation is about the creation of new value, right? Creation means that you actually have to realize it as well, not just conceptualize it. And if it's about the creation of new value, then we need ways to formally recognize the value that we might be creating, the expected value of things, that can translate into the realized value of things later, which should then appear in the P&L, which should be able to translate to assets on the balance sheet, which should. So there's a lot of quite basic fundamental work that needs to go into this. And whilst you said it's a new system, I think it rehashes a lot of the old things that we've been taught and are in all of those books behind you, right? I was very clear that I was standing on the shoulders of giants in trying to create this thing, but trying to fill a gap in a key part of the upstream ways of thinking and working that help to move all that great practice, all that great research, all that great thinking into something that ties it together into a financial metric.
It's funny you said standing on the shoulder of giants. When I write my weekly article, it's based on the episode, and I usually start writing it. I go down rabbit holes as I'm reading the book. So I'll pull out a piece and I'll go, oh, that, and then I'll think about a nice metaphor, etc. But what I actually thought about here was the opposite, that what happens in organizations is you can be the second CIO, the second head of innovation, or the second transformation officer behind somebody who's badly failed. And by that, I don't mean they necessarily have failed, but they may have brought in bad habits, or they may have given a bad impression to the organization. And the article's roughly, I haven't finished it yet, but some idea about standing on the shoulders of dwarves. And what I mean by that is that they've damaged credibility for innovation in the organization. And what it made me think of is, well, this is what happened in marketing. In many organizations, marketing was very easy pre-digital. So you had your press, you had your outdoor, you had your TV, you had radio, and it was kind of easy. And because there wasn't very much science behind it, or certainly not many marketers had that type of science that is available today in data marketing and digital marketing, because the metrics are very, very clear. And I felt that that's the shift that's needed in innovation, to actually put manners on it, to be able to bring it to an organization and show metrics, and metrics that aren't just based on users, or, as you talked about, things like NPS score or engagement inside an organization. So with that shift, we'll introduce this dynamic model, the XV model. Let's share at a high level, and then we'll double click on the different elements of it. But let's explain what it is a high level, and then each of the metrics that fall underneath it.
Yeah. And maybe I'll start actually by talking about where XV as a concept came from, right? So in doing research for this book, and I mentioned up front, this was a long time project and a real labor of love, right? I think there are God knows how many versions of this book that were more like the maniacal scribblings you might see in a Hollywood movie on a blackboard or a
Seven
chalkboard or
in
something, of
seven.
just complex. Exactly. Complex formulae that I'm like, they just can't be this. I need to find a way to make it simple, right? Because otherwise, you need a PhD in God knows what to make this thing work. It has to be simple. And I read all the things I could find. I've got a compendium somewhere of every single book and piece of content that's been written on innovation metrics, innovation accounting, innovation measurements, etc., etc. And I just didn't feel like I didn't think they were wrong, but I thought they were very hard to apply. And I thought I was walking the same tightrope again in my thinking around it, and just reinventing a wheel that it feels like a square wheel, right? It feels like it wasn't really working in the way that it should, and building. And so I went outside of innovation land and outside of even business world in some senses, and started to look in other areas to think about where have we found a way to measure things that are inherently quite hard to measure, right? That because innovation is, an idea is, it's fuzzy and uncertain and everything else, and ended up in an area that both of us I know love quite a lot, which is the science and metrics of sport instead. And I love the business of sport. I actually really like the science of, that sits behind trying to predict games and which players will do well, and the sports science that sits behind it, and even the betting markets. I think they're super fascinating, interesting things, right? And so unpicking that, and for folks that follow the world of soccer or football, there's a metric called expected goals, right? And expected value, whilst it's very different, is borrowed very, very closely from the idea of expected goals. And so I spend a long time really digging into the numbers, the processes, the thinking, and actually the history behind all of that as well. Read all of the books, all of the research papers, and spent months just in that world thinking, is there an application of it? The book again sort of tells my journey of that, but disassociated from me through the main characters of it that brings this to life. And I think that's quite a nice journey to sort of set this up, right? Because expected goals isn't perfect in the world of sport, but it's an indicator based off of a set of inputs that always existed, right? The data collection may have got more sophisticated as we've realized the empirical evidence actually does work and that can help you to make better decisions around all different aspects of culture and strategy and leadership and all the things actually as you start to use those words that give you business meaning and we can apply in the world of innovation inside a company or something else. And so that really was the underpinning of taking a concept from sport and trying to apply it to the abstract and confusing and unclear world of innovation, from expected goals to expected value, just to start that
And just
introduction.
to tip the hat as well to Freya. So Freya is actually named a bit of nepotism here. She's named after Simon's daughter, and Axel is Freya's brother in real life, but also in the book. And Axel's the data scientist that has this idea, that has this spark of genius that says, actually, you should look at this expected goals. And let's take it from there, because I love that setup, and I did make that connection where I was like, "Oh, this is nice. What he's doing here, he's using this other field, literally and metaphorically, to actually go, well, this actually applies very well to organizations, but it goes way more than, trust me here, the expected value of this is something. It, as you said, it goes into all these different elements and all these different lenses. And what it reminded me of, Simon, was the whole idea of that blind man and the elephant, that they all, what we have in most books on measurement and innovation is somebody seeing it from one perspective, but you actually do give it the holistic view to actually give you a much better measure, a much better predictor of what expected value is. So with that, let's double
Yeah.
click on these.
Let's talk about it, and we can come back to that blind man and the elephant because I do think there's a whole black box analogy that fits quite nicely with that we can dig into later. But yeah, so you introduced it up front. Expected value, simple formula, equals confidence times predicted value times time sensitivity times fit. Great. Like, what does that all mean, Simon, basically? And I would just add to this is not something that's been developed in theory and not put into practice, right? We've run and road tested this with organizations now globally, as well as living and breathing it internally from a Wazoku perspective as well. And you will find yourself as you adopt this, not just applying it to innovation, but to applying it to all things in life. It works. I've now started to use expected value in our sales process, replacing our historical one because I think it works better than that. But maybe I'm biased. Let's see. So let's dig into each part of the equation, and I explain how they build and how they work because they're all doing something that is interconnected, part of a system. They don't stand alone. They can borrow from historical learnings and also feed future learnings, as we know innovation is prone to want to do. But also they fundamentally try and answer different questions that add up to the whole. So let's forget the expected value piece for now, because we'll come back to that. That's the number that we are trying to derive. The idea is it's benchmarkable as well. So you can apply this number to all kinds of different types of ideas, whether that's different classifications from a horizon perspective or from an innovation categorization perspective, whether it's about products and features or services or something different on top of that, right? However, not everything should be XV'd because some things are a part of the work that we do to derive expected value. So let's dig into each of them. The first one, and these are all inherently structured to try and derive a specific answer, not just XV, but two key components, right? The first part of the equation, confidence, predictive value, and time sensitivity, are trying to help answer the question of, is this a good idea? Is it something that we should do? Just quickly back to expected goals land. Expected goals calculations kick in at around minute 5 of a game, right? So we're starting to predict from 5 minutes in what the score might be based off of what's happening. If you take that analogy to an idea, it's kind of at the point you have it, right? So an idea spurs, is this a good idea? Well, what data do we have at this point in time? The confidence lens, and this is an interesting one, right? All of these are indexed in slightly different ways. So we can, in the world, be anywhere between 0% confident and 100% confident in something. If we're brutally honest as human beings, there are very few things in the world we're 100% confident of, right? I can't be 100% confident we'll make it to the end of this podcast. I can probably be quite highly confident that something awful won't happen, but I can't be 100% confident. If you think about that, I sit in a lot of startup pitches and see founders. I've been one of those many times, pitching for funding or for access to an accelerator or something. And we're deeply passionate in those moments, right? Like we believe with absolute confidence that our idea is going to change the world and our revenue line is going to look like Lovables or Open AIs, and we're going to be the next decacorn driving X, Y, or Z. If you really dig into that, though, and think, well, what are the empirical things? What are the quantifiable things that we need to do to substantiate real confidence in this? We need to be able to show real willingness to pay for against a real problem in the marketplace, not just something else. That a lot of that's based off of gut feel, right? Even if we've done some of the good early learn lean startup thinking, back to standing on the shoulders of giants, and all of the things that we want to do, we don't have much evidence to support a lot of this right now. So in a standardized way, it's very hard for an early idea to have very high confidence against it, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50%. Some of that will be dictated by things that we've used in our previous examples of innovation world, where we say, well, we failed fast and we learned. Okay, well, can we use that learning now to enhance our confidence in this specific area right now? Because if we can, that's great. And that's that balance sheet idea I was giving you earlier, right? Of applying learning XV credits to the balance sheet that can be traded for accelerating certain aspects of the system as we go forward. So we can increase our confidence because we failed somewhere else. That's helping us to learn now. Fantastic. But confidence is always somewhere between 0% and 100%. And that can move around, right? This idea of XV being dynamic, back to the soccer example, that can shift quickly if something happens in a game. A red card happens, an injury happens, a substitution takes place, the weather changes significantly, whatever it might be, the strategy and tactics of the other team shift. In business land, that's like a budget changes, regulation kicks in, competition does something very differently, a new AI release changes the momentum of your thing positively or negatively. Your confidence can do this or do this on a regular basis. And so anything between 0 and 100, or in my case, 0 and 100, right? So you're trying to score that as an index across all of that. The predicted value is where we then derive a value from this, right? What we're looking for here, and in the early stages of an idea, this can be quite tricky to do, is what do we have to invest in this to get there? And what do we think as a minimum value this should be worth, let's say over a 3-year period, right? My benchmark says 3 years is a good metric for this. It kind of ties into things like the vitality index and other things as well. But you can play around with that from a business perspective to tailor for your time frame. But the idea is, we have to invest 1 million. We think it might derive 3 million, whatever it might be, right? 100 million, 1 billion, right? We have to play around that. The idea is you can standardize that from an organizational perspective. And if you don't know, you can use t-shirt sizes of small, medium, and large for things that apply to your organization based off of the best evidence you have at that point in time, right? And there's lots of things, market research and other things that we do as organizations that are quite black boxy at the moment, but actually should be tying through to the thing that we're trying to do. If we don't know predictive value, you can reverse engineer it. I'll come to that probably later in the discussion. And then time sensitivity. Not every idea feels like it's a super urgent idea, probably, right? We must run at AI tomorrow, otherwise we're going to be miles behind. Some may argue that the best businesses have run a little bit slower at AI than the ones that have burned a lot of money, really, to probably not generate much expected value and certainly not much realized value from an AI initiatives at this point in time. That doesn't mean it won't come. It means that perhaps the speed and the urgency we're applying to it should have been slowed rather than accelerated. So time sensitivity is an area we can over-index on the expected value algorithm, but also under-index on. So anything from 0.5 up to 1.5, right, on a ratio. Remember, this is a formula that we're calculating through. And so, it's going to feel like it's super urgent, but why is it? And again, there's a bunch of tests and a bunch of things that we brought into the book to help you figure out whether actually going slower might be a strategic advantage, whether just doing a business as usual cadence is the thing you should do, or you really should reprioritize things in your pipeline and do this quickly. Otherwise, you risk losing the risk and opportunity cost, or you risk, a real cost, a reputational or regulatory charge or something. But we need to try and substantiate all of those things by creating that first part of it, right? And that, you play that through and go, I've got 50% confidence. I've got some evidence of willingness to pay. I've got some evidence of market attractiveness. I've got a predicted value of, let's call it £100 million. So 0.5 times 100 million gives you 50 million. My time sensitivity is just business as usual. So let's just say 1. So right now my expected value is 50 million on this potential £100 million project, right? Quite simple and crude. Obviously, there's a lot more sophistication behind it. We will be able to work out from that on a portfolio-based approach and on the amount of money that we're spending in that predicted value piece, 2 things. One, is it a good idea against all the others that we've got in there, right? How much do we have to invest to create this much expected value at this point in time, right? Is part of the efficiency piece. And we've benchmarked that. I can tell you where you should be from an innovation perspective, back to the idea that innovation is the creation of new value. Innovation teams should be the most efficient creators of value in an organization. If they're not, they're probably not an innovation team, right? Like, it's our job to create new value efficiently. R&D get a different rope to create value in different ways with a different cost lens and a different risk lens. Innovation is not there to do that. We have to be the most efficient value creators in the organization. So we can start to benchmark and judge that, and also define where the organization's risk appetite is on those things as well, right? That first part now will know if this is a good idea. The last part, strategic fit, is then trying to ask the question for us, right? So is this a good idea for our organization? There are many good ideas that aren't good ideas for this organization. The financial services firm you mentioned up front were guilty of that. They built something that was probably a good idea, but not for them and not in the way that they did it, which meant that it persisted. A lot of money was put into it, but ultimately it was killed. And a lot of people lost their jobs as a consequence of that. And probably it should never have been done in the first place because it didn't meet the strategic fit piece. It was a good idea, but not the strategic fit component. And so there are a number of checks in there. Probably we can dig into them separately, so I'm not talking for the next hour on this. But the idea is this a good idea for us as an organization? And again, that has a rating to it that will give you a number, and you multiply those all together and it gives you an expected value. But what it also shows you is where you're weakest, to allow you to then go say, look, in order to improve our XV, we're going to go and spend some time digging into this area here, whether it's confidence related or strategic fit related or time sensitivity related or predicted value related, because those can move expected value significantly. And so in 2 weekly sprints, we're going to go and do that work and see how it shifts XV over that period. And so it's a dynamic living metric that feeds into the work that we're doing, but focuses the mind on the things that we're doing. And just lastly, and then I promise I'll stop talking and let you get in, is the idea of this isn't just you prioritize, isn't just that you then can justify the projects you want to justify, but actually should stop the emergence of zombie projects, of the things that you're forced to do, because we're creating real transparency of decision making. Confidence has a person's name tied to it. Who signed off on this confidence, right? Aidan, why did you put your name at 0.8, 80% confident in this idea? Where was your evidence? I didn't have it. Fine. Well, you really shouldn't be. Like, we can't over-index on these things because it's skewing these things and it forces through projects that should never have been delivered, but now they're done empirically. This ties into a system that's trying to drive the right things. It doesn't kill risk. It doesn't kill an appetite of experimentation. It does it in a very conscious and knowing way, so we can trace things through and back the right projects at the right time in the right ways.
There's so much, man, in it, isn't there? I was thinking about how much wastage we have when you mentioned R&D, or you mentioned even innovation funding. There's so much wastage, and in the mind of many innovators, we'll say, "Oh, I need to fail my way towards success," or would use terms like that, which there is a lot of strength in. But when you have some type of formula or some type of metric to work towards, it just helps you. Like, one of my biggest annoyances is when you're doing work, say for example training, you're going to the gym working out, and you're doing the wrong program and you end up getting injured. And the worst thing is, you were working hard, you made the effort of doing the work, and then you get it wrong. that for me is why, even you said about why I put the effort into the show of reading books. I will have no regrets at the end there. I'll know I did everything possible to make that the best it could be, so I can walk away and go, the outcome is the outcome. I worked on the input, and I say that I remember a quote. It's attributed to a guy called John Wanamaker, I think he died in the early 1900s. He was a retail and advertising pioneer, and he said he's the guy who was the origin of this quote. Half my advertising is wasted. The problem is I don't know which half. And I always think of that with this innovation funding, because we confuse activity for progress all the time in every aspect of life, but particularly in innovation. And the cost of this is so huge inside organizations when we need it to work. And one of the goals from my work, Simon, I know you're the same, is to actually help organizations survive, let alone thrive, to actually survive, because the cycles of change are getting faster and faster. And the collective cost, you call this out, for innovation is budget vulnerability. So innovation investments are the first to be cut when resources tighten. We all know that. Strategic disconnect. Innovation activities drift far from the core needs, like the chocolate teapot, which looks great but has no relevance to the organization, or we don't even have capability to do anything with it. Then there's talent disillusionment. This is a huge one. You hire good people, they have no formula or way to work, and they get tired of fighting for legitimacy or even just respect in the organization. It's a battle. Then there's portfolio bloat, which you say is where projects linger in zombie states, neither progressing or properly being terminated. And they're usually pet projects, or they're the ones you got over the line, or they're the CEO's favorite. Loads of reasons for them. And finally, this one is the biggest one, and this is where I was saying you stand on the shoulder of dwarves, is credibility erosion. So a head of innovation comes in, the organization have invested in that. They do their best with the tools they have, but they don't have this tool, and they don't have a way to speak to the organization, and it becomes innovation theater. And then the next head of innovation comes in, often not knowing what happened beforehand, and they're coming into an absolute mess, and they have no credibility. So it's just all innovation theater, and therefore they totally get disrespected. They get disillusioned, and that cycle goes over and over again. And I'd love you to share your inside view here. So you anonymized, as you do in the book, or in a way maybe summarized that this problem that XV solves, and some of the instances where you saw some business executives go, oh, okay, now I'm interested, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do here.
And I think you before I jump into that, you use the word innovation theater, and I'm quite explicit in the book that if we're not measuring innovation and we can't really get anyone to sign off on the value, then what are we doing other than innovation theater? And I think that I've tested that message, and whilst it can be quite a hard message to give to people, I think it's a hard one to push back on, right? If you've got no one in the finance, if your CFO or whoever it is that owns that budget, but it should be a CFO that cares about this really. Like, again, if you are the real vehicle of future value creation and the CFO doesn't care about it, back to my theater point again, right? For that reason. But it's also tongue in cheek why I wrote the book in 4 acts, as if it's like a theater performance, because innovation is, right? Like there's 4 different acts. It can be read and you could do act 1 and leave and come back to it as if it's the sequel, and the chapter 3, chapter 4, or whatever are like the 4 parts of a series. It's not necessarily designed to be consumed and digested in one big sitting, although I do appreciate you firing through it for this. But it's quite heavy going, because it is quite heavy going. But that act thing was very much a play on words and a recognition that a lot of this just is, unfortunately, theatre. And that's sad. But that's really where this kicks in, right? So in going to companies, I probably haven't had a XV product market fit, like for that, if I use XV in that analogy, for anything like anything else that I've done other than XV before, which is a great sign for it, because going to speak to innovation teams, and we're in one of those innovation cycles at the moment where innovation teams are fighting for their lives again. So it's, in some ways, it's a good time for XV. In other ways, there's not a lot I can do if there's not a lot of value capture been done already. But it starts to bring some it resonated heavily with lots of different companies, right? Businesses that are desperately trying to help to showcase that we've been doing all this incredible work. It does feed through to value. There is a pipeline of value coming through. Help me to visualize this and help me to understand it. And I talk in Act One of the problem with innovation performance around this idea of black box innovation. And if you think about the algorithm or the formula that I just spoke through again, confidence isn't this standalone thing, right? You will do work in the areas of time sensitivity, predicted value, strategic fit that will inform your confidence. You will spend money in other projects before this one that will inform your confidence, that will inform the things that you are doing. They're very interconnected and systemic in the things that you're doing, right? So get greater strategic fits. The business launches a strategy that's very much aligned to this idea. Your confidence will start to increase and your predicted value will probably start to increase because you think the business has got more appetite to invest in it. Strategy shifts the other way. What I mean by that is that they're interconnected. Right now, a lot of the activity that happens in our organizations, however, is hyper disconnected. Think about how the innovation value chain, I'm astounded when I find innovation and strategy teams that barely talk to each other. Right? Forget innovation and finance teams. Those are two worlds that just can't, as we've discussed. But innovation and strategy teams, the handover between research teams that might be doing scouting or other work into latter stages of the innovation pipeline is often very analog, quite informal in a lot of cases, and results in a huge amounts of lost value as we go as well. These are all black boxes. They often live in very different systems using different metrics and measurements, each of them trying to justify their own existence and their own budgets rather than tying it into a universal value creation budget or expected value budget, right? And so the need to try and see this as not a set of functions and jobs to be done in an organization, but to tie it into an overarching system that can then go, yeah, look, what you do next. But this doesn't happen very often. Like, I'm astounded when I go and go, but what happens next? And people are like, I'm not 100% sure. Or that's someone else's problem, or that value metric is different. And I'm like, it isn't, right? It's all part of the same system to drive through to the same thing. And I appreciate that, sometimes in sales and marketing, it's hard to attribute what PR might do to the ultimate sale, right? Or something along those lines. But it's not really, actually. If you think back again to, there are mechanisms for attribution, but you can XV those things. And that's why I said I start to see it used in lots of other areas. And perhaps there are things you shouldn't spend money on as well. That's also the other piece of it, not just hiding away behind abstraction and ambiguity, but really trying to tie these things back around. But if you don't know how the system works, and in many organizations we do not, then forget the culture argument, forget the metrics argument, forget the expected value argument. You're just going to keep running. You're just one hamster running around on a wheel, right? And so we've got to get better at tying these things together. And a lot of this discussion forces that realization, that forces that internal conversation that starts to look this as not just little isolated budgets, but a real value chain and a real way of doing things that can be tracked and can be measured and can be metricized in a way that the business can really understand. And there are loads and loads of these examples, right? And I'm as proud of the projects that don't get started as the ones that do. I'm as proud of the ones that get funded more quickly because we can start to see these things like right now, and as proud of the ones that get killed fast as well because something shifted. But it was now done in a truly empirical way that the organization could get behind. And no sales team has a once a year sales forecasting meeting, right? The best ones are doing it. We forecast nearly daily. Some will forecast weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. Innovation and XV has to have the same cadence, the same discipline, the same understanding behind it, because where sales is driving revenue, we're driving future value creation.
You reminded me, I'm researching Nvidia a lot for my new book, and one of the big realizations for Jensen Huang was that most companies, most chips get disrupted every 2 years. So he's like, well, I need somebody working on the new life cycle while we're managing the current life cycle. And we'll look through the lens of an S curve. You know me, man, I love a good S curve. But one of the things I wanted to share was actually XV in action. So I'm going to share on the screen what this actually looks like when it's filled out. So we'll have a little bit of empathy, Simon, for those who are just listening to us, which is most of the audience. But one of the things that just popped into my mind was a guy we had on the show, brilliant guy called Rasmus Ankerson. He wrote a book called The Gold Mine Effect. We had him on the show to talk about that. And it was about why you get this pockets of excellence in different sports all over the world. But like you, his ultimate reason, his frustration why he wrote the book was he was a football coach. And he went on to be football manager for Brentford. He now runs a fund that bought Southampton, for example, in the UK. But one of the biggest frustrations he had was there was a kid they took onto their team in Denmark at the time. And the only reason they took this kid onto the team was because his dad was the janitor or the groundsman, the groundskeeper, and they wanted to keep him, the dad. So they're like, here, look, we'll put your kid into the academy. And with no expectation of this kid, he goes on to become, I'm going to say, Simon Kjær, who ended up being the captain of Denmark. Amazing captain, amazing player. And it bugged Rasmus Angerson for the rest of his life. He's like, how did I not see the potential in this guy? And for me, that's a metaphor for that's what XV does. It's like data science will actually show you, like Moneyball, how somebody might be at a sunset player, or maybe they don't have the skills that we will need in the new technological cycle, or the way the organization is going, or the way the industry is going. And it's one of the things that XV does is actually gives you not only a measurement of the present, but also when we need to kill something. And one of the things you talk about is kill credits. I love that term. But also how not to back a pet project. And before I actually share this thing, let's share that, because one of the things you talk about was where they had this project, Freya's team. One of the team had this thing. It was really well established. It looked really promising. And through the lens of XV, they're like going, oh, this does not look good at all. We need to actually kill it. And it takes the person away from the decision, which when you think about it, and that's why I mentioned football, many people get backed because of a preference of a manager, or they might like this player, they might like their personality, versus this is raw data about how they're performing without any you like them or you don't. And I think this is a really important aspect and positive aspect of why XV is so important in projects.
Yeah, and you have to remove the emotion from it, right? Like I try and do that in the narrative of the book, and I think it comes across quite well. And everyone's a bit nervous about how it might be perceived. But once you trust a system, like a sales forecast, again, I use examples in the book to try and pull us back into something that we can associate with in other walks of business life. If the process works and it's something that the business uses, I have one of my investors in Wazoku is senior person in one of the global recruitment firms. And he took me in the early days of the business around the different sales floors of recruitment, of the recruitment firm. And on the walls, you see all these charts. You go into any office in the world, you see exactly the same charts, and everyone understands them. To you, they look like gibberish, right? But every single person understands them. There's a system here, and that system drives a competitive nature every single day. People understand it, right? And anywhere in the world, it's the same. And there's an analogy to that, but innovation totally lacks it. And so we've got to find a way of creating that standardization so we understand it. When you do, you remove the emotion from all of it. Because, of course, if you've worked really hard and someone comes in and says, we're killing this thing, it feels awful. But if you understand why and you communicate why, and it's not necessarily dead either. It's not just disappeared because we're embarrassed about it. No, we've made an informed empirical decision to prioritize something else over this because it has a higher XV, it has a higher XV efficiency. We can make more dollar for spending a dollar here, right? And that's a really important piece. We're creating value. If I show you two projects and one can create $100 million, but it costs $100 million, and that's lots of innovation projects, if not worse, AI might be negative XV efficiency for some years to come. Doesn't make it bad. It just means it's a different investment criteria and a different thing to move into versus one that create 100 million and only cost you $1,000. That's a very different lens, right? And obviously those two extremes feel ridiculous, but once you start to get into narrow comparisons and look at the different levers that are actually driving those, then it becomes quite easy to disassociate yourself from that. Not always, but does. And so the book tries to deal with that in quite a nice way. There's two other terms. You mentioned kill credits, and I said up front, I think we've got to learn to speak the language of the P&L and the balance sheet. one of the things that I look at is how can I take the idea of failing forward and of the credits that I've heard so many times. What do I get? I have to run these innovation boot camps or innovation learning courses, or I'm encouraged to fail fast. And so there's value in that, right? I'm like, maybe. And if there is, then we take the expected value at that point in time, right? Whether that's $1 or $10 million or more, and we lock it into a kill credits balance sheet for the organization. And because it needs to be applied learning, it has a shelf life of no more than 12 months, right? It should depreciate over a 12-month period in whatever makes sense. I argue in a straight line, right? So in month one, you've got, let's call it 100 million. Month two, you've got 12 less, and et cetera, et cetera. However, if you use it, and as I said earlier, if that learning helped me to go, my confidence has just gone up by 10% because of this thing, that 10% gain you get on that specific idea is taken from the kill credits list, right? You can manage that and say, we just gained a 10 million of expected value on this project over here or on these 5 projects over here because of that learning. We can attribute them back. And of course, that's complicated, right? But it's no more complicated than many of the other system-based things that we do in other parts of the organization right now. And so there are many ways of managing assets on the balance sheet, and learning knowledge has to be one of those skills, capabilities, and others, right? And so there are ways that Wazoku has that we can do those things and that we'll continue to work on as well that show that, yeah, you did get some credit for that. Separate term, just because it'll slip out of my mind and it's not related here, but you mentioned Brentford, you mentioned Denmark, and we've talked about the football thing as well, is there's quite a nice concept, and I think it's in a Danish newspaper they published this. Again, I mention it in the book, that takes XG and applies how the leagues would have turned out if the data played out purely, right? So in many games, you might see the XG was 1 to this team and 3 to this team, but actually the result was 2-1 to the other way around, right? And the team won. So there's a league of justice that's published every single week, right? And that shows how if the data purely played out, how it would have happened. That's a fun thing to do, but also it shows that this isn't a perfect system, right? And my XG, that XG, my XV is not a perfect system, but it's better than nothing. And I think there's something really important in that better than nothing, because there's a whole bunch of other systemic factors, including luck and bad luck, that can get in the way of these things. But an empirical framework versus a non-empirical, invisible framework should win out every single time over the long run. And in general, you may get seasons of underperformance or overperformance, but in general, it reverts to the mean, right? And that's the way that we have to start viewing these things. But there is no mean right now.
My son plays soccer, and the team asked me to speak to the players. And the thing I said to them was like, I didn't say, I didn't do a table of justice or no XG or anything like that. I just said that there's a big difference between losing a game and being beaten, because losing means you had it, you were in charge and you let it slip between your hands, versus you lost because the referee made a call that you couldn't have done anything about. Somebody gave away a penalty, stuff like that, that just was beyond your control. And that's being beaten. And you can always accept being beaten way better than losing a game. And this is what the whole idea is: if you're going to do it, at least have a system. And the other thing I always encounter, Simon, even in my consulting work, is it doesn't actually matter what framework you take as long as you actually implement that framework and all align around that framework. And what I felt with XV is it's a big lift initially to get this work, to implement this work, but you don't have to do it all at once. You can go frame by frame, act by act, scene by scene, implement this and just go, okay, to start with, we're going to do this. We're going to implement this part of it. Then we're going to build on it, and then we're going to build on it. And I wanted to build that up to actually show people on our screen here what it can actually look like when you have it in place, because it is the language of finance eventually. So I'd love you to talk about here. I took 2 projects, Project Alpha and Project Beta here, and I'd love you to talk through, bearing in mind that most of our audience are audio, what we're seeing here and what it actually sounds like when you're explaining it in the board meeting versus an image or a predicted image of what it will look like in the future, or give me another 6 months, I promise we'll have something to show. This actually gives you
Yeah.
language of finance.
In the book, these are two examples of projects that have been running for a while, but again, in before the system is invented, had no real way of thinking and structuring the expected value of what they're trying to create. So there's Project Alpha, an AI-powered customer service assistant, very thematically topical at the moment, I suspect, for many, and Project Beta, an internal process automation idea concept that's being worked on. And we talk through the concepts, we describe them and other things, and you need all that qualitative work to go in. But in expected value land, we're looking at, okay, let's start with confidence, right? What is the current confidence in this idea? Well, the AI powered customer service assistant is still an early stage concept. It has a bunch of assumptions, but they're really gut feel at this point in time. There isn't a lot more that we've had the chance to test in it. And so, whilst the business was extremely excited by this, right, it was an AI customer service assistant. They could see how it could create lots of efficiency and improve customer satisfaction scores. Actually, once you start to empirically look at confidence, there's no reason to score it any more than a 30% confident in it, right? There's just not enough weight behind the evidence yet to support it. And as we play that forward, that really hurts this idea, but it should, right? And so this was something that was getting very senior backing and getting a lot of push in it. The predicted value of successful was 2 million in cost savings, including the revenue that had to be invested, or the money that had to be invested in it at this point in time. So not huge, right? It's quite small on that basis. But that's also because it's an early stage idea. It's most likely to have a much higher PV, predicted value, in the future, but it's being penalized because we don't know, right? It would be pure guesswork. And we're not trying to guess around $1 billion ideas here. We're trying to use substantive evidence to support it. There's no urgent competitive market pressures around it. So it has a time sensitivity of 1, i.e. we're not slowing it down, we're not speeding it up. It'll just work to the normal cadence of how this business does things. And it has strategic fit of 0.8. And we didn't really talk about strategic fit much earlier on, but strategic fit seeks to address 4 different checks, right? So just to dig into those a little bit, right? We talked about all the first part of the equation, but not necessarily strategic fit. So there's 4 different component areas to this. One is it a high value problem? Like, does it really matter now? And is there enough reason to do that? And there's some alignment for this in the business, but actually they don't know enough about it to really make that work. Competitive advantage. Do we as a company have a right to win and to do this? There's a little bit of buy versus build in some of this as well, right? That many of us will be familiar with. Is this something we should really do ourselves, or should we find someone else to do it for us, or should we not do it at all? Is it an attractive market? So is there something big, growing, accessible for us to do on this product that we're looking to take out to market and drive? And does it fit with an emerging trend? Well, AI riding a wave, yes, yes, yes. So it scores quite highly on the trends part, but less so on market attractiveness, company advantage. And so it ends up slightly under 100% weighting on strategic fit at 80% or 0.8. And so you multiply all those things together, including the cost that has to go into it, and the resources that need to do, and that will derive you an expected value and an expected value efficiency for this this specific project. So 0.3 times 2 million times 1 times 0.8 gives you a number. We compare that to Project Beta, which is the process automation idea, which has a much higher confidence score at 80%, because the pilot has been run, already strong evidence to support it, not subjective, but really quantitative evidence to support it, which is obviously boosting this idea. It has a predicted value of only $500,000, so quite a bit less than $500,000, so but quite a bit less than the 2 million of the other idea, a quarter of the value, but is obviously over indexing versus the other one, because one's 30% confident, the other's 80% confident. Equally, there's a big system migration happening, and so this needs to get done quickly. And so time sensitivity is also over indexed at 1.3. We need to accelerate this, not decelerate it, or business as usual it. And there's a strong strategic fit for this specific reason. It fits closely with the areas that we have just discussed earlier. And it's not hugely expensive to deliver, only $75,000. And so you multiply all those together and you actually end up with an XV of more than $500,000 on this idea, right? Because there's a reason to do it quickly. There's a cost of not doing it quickly. But also that XV of over 500,000, I can't do the math in my head here, but whatever it is only costing us 75,000. So the efficiency to create that is also much higher as well. We invest $1 in this case to create multiple more dollars than we would in the AI evidence-based AI system at the moment. Just two simple examples, right? There's lots to unpick in all of it. There's lots of reasons why that doesn't do justice to any of it, just in a quick example. But you can see, therefore, what you would need to go and do to add greater XV to all of the different areas of the AI assistant, and why you might want to run a bit slower before you've really got the evidence behind all of that, because you're going to have to sink a lot more money into it. And part of the reason we end up running these zombie projects is we sink so much in, we don't want to give up on them, right? And we don't want to be wrong when we've sunk 500,000 in, but we can test faster, get to willingness to pay evidence faster or not. We can do lots of things in the world now faster than ever before. And therefore, we should be bold enough to want to test those things quickly, slow down when necessary. And this gives you that really good, clear thing that the AI project was the sexy one. It's the one that business wanted to do and the innovation team wanted to work on. But the other one had a higher XV, right? And therefore, it should be prioritized. It had a higher urgency to it, greater confidence behind it. And it doesn't mean we don't get to do the other things. It means that in a world of finite resources, it's clear which ones we should back. And there are reasons why we may still back the other one. There are reasons why we may try and do all of those things and burn ourselves out or whatever it might be. But we now have a data point that we can work off the back of.
It's so important, man. I was thinking, like, I'm doing that series, as you know, on resource allocation process, the Joe Bauer series, and where his work back dating right back to the 1960s, 1970s was that most projects get stuck in the middle based on the opinion of a middle manager who is responsible for the budget, based on you, the person who's asking for that revenue, based on, did you have credibility or did you do a good job last time? Because if you tried something and it didn't work, your name is dirt around here because you're making me look bad. And that's one of the things this does. It removes that personal opinion. That's what I was saying about Rasmus Ankerson, is that this idea that it's not the coach's opinion, it's the data that decides. And that's what I love about it. One last thing I thought we'd add, though, which is important, and not just because I love a good S curve, is the importance of the S curve as a lens through which to look at all this. And there's a brilliant quote that I love by Steve Jobs, and he said that, and this was at the time, just to put it into context, he said Apple at the time was a company with not much resources, so they have to be very, very strategic about what initiatives they back. And he said they back technologies in their springs. And I thought that was a nice setup for the idea of the S curve, because it helps you map your portfolio and also helps you decide, is it a sunset project? Is it a trend that's going to grow? But also, where does all these things fit across the S curve? So maybe you'll start, just so we're all on the same page, people listen to us, what an S curve is, and then talk to us through how it maps to XV.
Yeah, as I wrote this chapter, obviously, Aidan, you were front of mind for me the entire way through, knowing that you are Mr. S Curve as well. So hat tip to you on this chapter. And I quite enjoyed writing it.
Paul Nunes, by the way, who wrote the book Jumping the S Curve before I even knew him, and which is a magnificent book. Also, an episode I'll link to in the show notes. Great guy.
And I understand why as well, right? And I think off the back of many of our chats, I have dug deeper into it and really brought it into the core of where XV can be quite valuable, because it's the hardest leap to take, right? To recognize or not that the thing that's fed you until now, the product, the service, whatever it might be, is reaching the end of its natural life, right? It's in its maturity, late maturity decline phase. And we need to start to invest in the thing that's going to leap us to the next place, whatever that might look like. That is pure innovation land in many ways, but we lack a way of quantifying and capturing that as well, right? The S curve's beautiful, but how do you quantify it? And how do you turn it into the empirical metric that shows that it's better to sell this car now and go get a new one because the cost of maintaining it is actually more, even if you're going to run it into the ground. And maybe that's a bad example, but you see what I'm trying to say with it is it's quite hard to go and spend that loads of money to get to the next thing that's super ambiguous and you're not quite sure if it's going to do the thing, and you can't quite see the exponential thing that's about to hit you on the other side of the S curve, because the exponential change at the end of that decline phase comes pretty fast. It's pretty well documented that the best years of many organizations were within 18 to 24 months of the year, 2 years after they were dead, right? Like very many organizations had peak year followed by very rapid decline on the other side of it. So XV, I think, gives us a metric to start to track and manage that piece of it, right, across each of the different phases. And innovation struggles with many of these languages of horizons and everything else, right? Like there's a lot of different models. I chose to not really take that on in the book, actually, but the S curve kind of is my way of at least tackling that, right? We have an emergence phase, an acceleration phase, a maturity phase, and a decline phase, quite simply put, for most things that we will do, right? As human beings, as products, as services, whatever it might be. And those curves are probably accelerating, probably in most sectors. I guess XV can probably tell me more about what those look like, and maybe that's a project for me to think about doing. But if you think about the confidence assessment, the value estimation, the time sensitivity, all of these urgency pieces, value metrics, and everything else are very aligned to where we might be on an S curve and when we might need to start to think about over investing in the thing that's going to leap us to that next piece. I think it will shorten the gap and make it more easy, more frictionless. Maybe that's a good way of talking about it, to take some of those leaps as well, because we can start to tie it back to the language of the P&L and the balance sheet, right? The assets that we are creating, the old assets that are coming to the end of a life, the different value levers that exist in our organization, and actually start to see ways to speak to those things in a slightly different way. I think there's more work for me to do on this, right? This book will be followed up sometime in the future by a much more practical handbook version of this, right? This is very much a storybook with useful concepts and frameworks and other things in it, but there'll be a much more hands-on version of it. And I'll probably dig deeper into this topic because I think it's critical, right? Part of what I want to get to now is helping people to back more of the right projects. The world needs it. We are not short of innovation budget. We are short of innovation outcomes and value creations. And I think that my hypothesis is, again, it's not because we're bad at doing the work, not because we're bad people are trying to not do good things. It's because we don't have the right ways of justifying the things we should be doubling down on and are spending too much money on things we should have killed a long time ago that are wasting time and resources for huge cost, right? Not just monetary cost, but environmental cost and other cost as well. So that's my immediate goal, was just to try and help get more of the right projects funded with the money that already exists. I don't think we need more. We just need to spend it better and more effectively.
It brings together, as you say, all the different elements. And one last one to ask, and then I'll let you go back to your own Matilda and Freya and Alex, all the people you dedicate the book to. But the AI element, you do mention that because AI actually has a role to play in XV as well, and you do call that out. So it is like this extension that we can add to the whole pie, but not to replace us, but to actually augment us in some way.
I stripped back a lot of the AI thinking from the book, actually. There was a whole chapter on it, and we decided to take it out and sort of blend more of the AI language in, partly because there's so much happening that I felt like it could be out of date very quickly, a lot of the stuff that we'd written on it. But what I absolutely believe to be true is that in in a world where we can break down black boxes, and the reason I'm quite pro a lot of the business change and transformation that's being driven by the rush to try and make AI the value creator, which I don't think it will be. I think it'll be a toolkit to help unlock some of the things going forward in most cases, is that it's forcing us to bring together data in a much greater horizontal way than we have before. If we can break the black boxes of innovation and then apply the lenses of XV and other frameworks to that connected data set, we will start to see patterns emerge. We will start to be able to understand the full innovation value chain, the skills, the resources, the empirical weighted value of different approaches, right? I have so much value, so much evidence to show that open approaches are the most efficient way of creating new value, right? The XV on open innovation efficiency significantly outweighs any other approach, right? Quantifiably benchmarked, evidence based. And yet it's a fraction of the adopted ways of getting stuff done in organizations, i.e., we prefer wasting money, right? Like that's, and not creating value. And so the more we can start to embrace smart machine capabilities to bring the right data to bear in standardized structures that are bought into and understood, will help us to make better decisions, not gut feel based decisions, not hierarchy based decisions, not I don't care what the data says, I want you to do it anyway. Well, that's fine, Mr. CEO, CFO, whoever. But your name's going against this in the system that we're working against, and you will be judged on judgment day against it, not me. And so there are just clear patterns that we need to start to bring forward. And that's where I'm excited for what AI can do on both sides. I think you introduced me to the Icarus concept as well in one of our discussions or one of your great talks
Seth
or
Godin
whatever. And I
actually
talk about it.
was, yeah.
I know it's Seth's idea, and I know you're very good at passing the real credit to other people, but you introduced me to Seth's concept. But the piece that you added in that I sort of knew but hadn't really brought to the idea of, it's not just about flying too high but also flying too low. And I think that many innovation teams are more guilty of flying too low than flying too high, right? And that there are ways of trying to measure that through poor XV efficiency, right? There is no point spending $1 to make $1, right? Or spending $1 to make $1 that you can't even empirically evidence and that's probably where most teams are today, if not worse. And that there's just a lot to do to unpick those aspects of this, right? And so yeah, I think there's S-curve jumps and all these big bold visions, but there's a lot of just fundamentals we got to fix
And
first.
man, all this applies to life as well. Don't waste your time. Time is such a precious resource. Simon, for people who want to find out more about the book, I know there's a website dedicated to it. You're very generous with concepts you're giving away. Also, Simon's kindly going to agreed to come back on the Innovation Show for the Innovation Show audience. So we're going to have a webinar of some sort. Email me, and that's how you'll get in, because we have limited amount of places available. Admin at theinnovationshow.io. Email us, let us know if you're interested in attending. We'll put you in there. Very limited places available for that one. And Simon, for people who want to find out more about Wazoku and XV, where's the best places?
Yeah, so a few bits on that. Thanks, Aidan, as well. And I would be delighted to run that session with folk if they want to really get under the skin of XV. We're also working on more tools and more supports. You can find those at xvbook.com, and that website will keep getting built out with more tooling. Wazoku, you can visit our website, wazoku.com. I also have a podcast, as you know, that we're going to serialize the audio version of the book, one chapter at a time, over the course of the next few weeks. So check out the Total Innovation podcast as well, a rival but friendly podcast. Aidan's been on it as well many times over the next few weeks, and there'll be a specific XV version. And then later in the year, we're going to release the full audio version. We want as many people as possible to read it. So that we're not making any money on these books. We've dropped them to the lowest price we can on the distribution channels that we've got them through. So all usual places, Podcasty, Amazon, and others as well. So yes, that's where folk can find more about it. And hopefully we hear the language of XV being adopted across more boardrooms and more innovation teams around the
Amen.
world.
And no rivals, man. Innovation needs friends. We are complementary. Author of Expected Value, The System to Measure, Prove, and Scale Value, Simon Hill. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I finally just want to thank our sponsor, Kyndryl, who run and reimagine the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses with a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability. Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find out more about Kyndryl at kyndryl.com.